Okay, greetings everybody. Today we're going to be having our 2-for-1 day, right? So the first class, I will focus, today's topic, and by today's topic I mean both classes, so we'll have a break between the two classes. So one class ends and then the other, and we'll start the other class. I'll have a sign-up sheet for the other class also. So just so that it is done correctly. Today's topics for the classes are going to be what we call the tools of politics. The primary focused reading was basically focusing on the Lord's chapters 12 through 20. Where Lord gives out in those chapters, he spells out what he calls the fundamental instruments or tools that political actors have at their disposal. Okay? And we're going to be, there's 8 of them. Well, actually, there's probably 9 if we separate, if we divide one, because one has 2, okay? The third one he mentions is really education and culture, and that's perceived as can be a separate, or they can be both unitary in the sense of what they accomplished, one sense, but they also can be divided into 2 categories. And we have to understand that they're also the tools work in 2 ways. The tools shape political actions. By the political actor uses the tool, right, to shape the political environment. And because that is being done, future political actors or actors themselves are shaped by their interaction with the various tools. And also, because of the character of the division of human labor and human skills, and the nature of people's characteristics, certain political at one level, people are going to specialize in one skill over another. In other words, a true political master, someone who is actually going to be a competent statesman, has to be competent in all the tools. If he's not competent in all the tools, he has to be able to judge the competence of those people he relies on to deliver the tools that he cannot himself be competent in. Now, Machiavelli, that's why we read I even recommended the Machiavelli Princes, the chapters that we read, which focus on the virtues of the prince, and as well as, these are the chapters that deals with the arms, his discussion of arms and man, which means the use of things, and also his discussions of princes. Chapters 12 through 14 are the infamous section that deals with the questions of arms and man, the questions of using of mercenaries versus that. The idea of warfare is always being the prince's primary, always going to be concerned with the art of war and the art of hunting and things like that, things tied to war. This is going to be the thing, and that the art of war, the prince needs to always be on the hunt, and the hunt does 2 things: preps him for war, but also gets him to know the lay of the land he lives in, to know the land and the features, the characters, the people, and by knowing the lands and the areas, he can then think by analogies. In other words, it's the idea of by learning your own areas and regions and things, you can then apply the logic and learning about the territories and lands to when you come across similar places elsewhere and similar peoples elsewhere. In other words, the argument of knowledge from analogy. That, in other words, how do you learn? How do you know? It's not just knowing this idea that you can only know the other by knowing the other. Machiavelli says, no, you can know that there's going to be a lot of things that they're going to have in common. In other words, certain land, certain territory, certain things, certain features of the land, you're going to find them elsewhere. The features of the land are going to shape the character of the people who live in that land. Okay, and therefore they're going to have the same customs and habits. Even though they may be different peoples with different languages, there's going to be enough interlapping similarity that they will behave in the similar ways. So therefore, one can, by studying your own territory, your own land, your own area, the regions around it, you can, by that, through the reasoning, by application of analogy, you're able to do. That's why he says the study for war is the study to lead. And that's to be a leader. To be a leader. That's what. So I read this chapter in the Prince. Then we also, for the next class, we kind of hit on the chapters which he talks about the virtues of the Prince, the questions of the characters and characteristics. Why is that important? Because, well, we will see. That'll be next week. We'll talk about the virtues of the Prince per se, because the characteristics of leadership will be the various skill set you have, the skills and knowledge and things like that you have. So that will be, and the question of strategy, Lord will deal strategy, so that will be on the 6th. So I gave you a prelude for that. But today, the Prince is dealing with the question of arms, the question of the skill fight. And this will be tied probably more later to, honestly, to the second half of the course, the second part of this lecture thing, later in the day, on when we deal with force, okay? But, this is the problem, force. The modern thinkers think force, and anyways, Machiavelli simplifies it. Machiavelli does that weird thing. He says that the arms and laws. You have to the two aspects of this. You have arms and laws. But what he does is say, well, if you have bad laws, you'll have bad arms. So therefore, good arms you'd necessarily have to have good laws. So there's no need to pay attention to laws as long as you pay attention to good arms. So he does a nice little trick with this. He reduces all the concern for law and the functions of this, to being the concern for arms, because his assertion that without good laws there could not be good arms, and without good arms there could not be good laws. So therefore there's interconnection, and therefore arms seem to be more important than laws in this sense, or laws encompass good arms would encompass the requirement of good laws. So the Prince here offers us a kind of a further instruction. The other reading for this week was from Walter chapter 6, which dealt with bureaucracy, Weber's conception of bureaucracy, which we'll highlight when we discuss the question of administration. So let's turn to if we turn to the 8, administration, today's lecture will focus on these 4. Administration, law, education, culture, and economics. The second part of the lecture we'll do later at 3 will focus on diplomacy, force, intelligence, and communication. I'm going to recover, and before I do this, we have to specify 2 things. Oops, I'm sorry, I apologize. This is people calling what they... I thought I put things on hold. I hate this when I put things on hold and it doesn't put on hold. Yes, he's going back. Hold on, there it goes, sorry. Go away. People call, and they always want to call you just when you can't talk to them. Come on, there. Silence. I apologize. Again, people always call you when at times when they... Statecraft, and what is statecraft? The focus of now is the question of the application of tools. The application of this. It is the art of conducting state affairs, statecraft. Statecraft is the art of conducting state affairs, the affairs of political entities. Now, there's a famous joke. The joke is, what's the difference between a statesman and a politician? There's a joke. A statesman is usually a politician that's been dead a couple years, right? A couple decades, right? Or the other, using Hobbes's famous line about the difference between kingship, tyranny and kingship is this. Tyranny is this, kingship misled, right? Is that Hobbes made a joke that people call things they call the rule of the few oligarchy because they dislike the rule of the few. If you dislike it, you call it the bad name. If you like it, you call it the good name. Politician has prerogative. In our time, we use the concept of the politician in a derogatory way. Okay, we use it as not a positive thing, but as a negative thing. We have negative associations with this. Where statesman has the conception of being a positive, a leader, or something, in the positive sense. But honestly, they're both technically the same thing. It's political craftsmanship. The classical Greek word is the politikos, the political actor, or the civic actor who acts in the civic arena. Okay, they're acting on the civic stage. Richard Nixon wrote one of his memoirs, a book called In the Arena. And the arena is not the stage or in the stadium or something. The arena is the public space where political actors, anyone who looks in the public space and trying to influence the public space. Now, the problem is, what do we understand as the public space? Today, we have a very, some people argue the public space, the scope of the public and private overlap in a sense, or are to be separated. Even the political and the social are to be separated to some degree. The modern liberal world wants to have spheres of separation of zones where things are. So we want to separate the private from the public, and at the public, there's the social versus the political, or the governmental. Okay. The Greek world, in many sense, the classical world, is seen to be too oppressive because the social, the political, and the social and the political often intersect and interlap heavily. The liberal world wants to divide the social and the political. Okay? The modern world sought to divide the two and have two zones. And the modern attempts to reintegrate the social and the political are seen as totalitarian. This is why some people will talk about, this is Karl Popper's famous work, The Closed Society and Its Enemies, right? The open society, the idea of an open society is one where there is a separation between the social and the political, right? But the problem with the social is that we often lump the social with the private. In other words, there is this perception that what many things that are social that we don't want political are really the scope of the private. Okay? Like family matters. Are family matters purely private? No, they're social. They involve other people. Any activity that goes beyond the self is no longer private in that sense. So this is the conundrum we face in the world we live in, is that we have zones of separation of the private, the social, and the political. And that the arena that we look, the political arena, often actualizes all three zones. So the statesman is what? Is the man who is man or woman. And we say, statesman, sexist word. No. I mean, that's the problem of English language. English language, men means both men and women. Man means both men and women in one sense. Because that refers to the human being. English language itself tends to have rules that today we would, that's sexist. But If you try to make it if you try to do it inclusive, then the English becomes ridiculous. It doesn't work grammatically. You can try it. You can make everything they, but by doing that, you end up destroying all grammar. So I'm going to be correct in my grammar and don't care about the insensitivity about this. So therefore, the statesman is what? He is the person who engaged in statecraft. Statecraft is the approach of politics to understand politics in terms of political actions. Therefore, what are the actions? Legislation, regulation, the implementation of either legislation or regulation. Therefore, engaging also in policy change, and therefore what we call leadership, political leadership. The idea of the leader, the idea of someone organizing, coordinating, and cooperating. In other words, to accomplish anything in a aggregate environment, you need leadership. In other words, I'm sorry. In other words, pure aggregation of social actors don't accomplish anything. You need leadership to accomplish things. Organizing principles. Now, sometimes organizing principles are emergent. Leaders will emerge from this group, but you need leadership. This is the concept. This is one of the fundamental principles of organization, of any effective organization. You need someone to take charge. You can't govern by committee. You can't govern by a group. It will be ineffective. If you're always going to have a group making all the decisions, this is always going to be ineffective, inefficient, and causing delays and causing growth. What happens is the nature of effective organization will require streamlines of decision-making process. So as long as the rule then becomes, are the leaders going to be emergent, selected from below, or do they impose themselves from above? In other words, are they self-selecting and impose their order on the society or the people or your group from above, top down, or do leaders emerge out of the people themselves, by which they empower and select and elect people to represent them and to act on their behalf? These are the two strategies of leadership. And leadership, thus, is a very important concept. Learning to be first of all, this is the purpose of the universities. The real purpose of the universities is to train elites. You are the elites. I'm sorry. You are the elites. You're attending one of the two principal universities in Poland. You're attending the principal university at the national capital. You're the children, because of the nature of the current Polish university, which are no longer national. 30 years ago, Warsaw University students, only 20% came from Warsaw. Now it's over 80%. Okay? In other words, the Polish universities have increasingly become more and more parochial in who attends. But because you're the children of the bureaucrats and the administrators and the leaders of the city, some of you are. To get in Warsaw, you have to score well in to get a program like this. My God, why? Our undergrad selection process. I'm sorry. There's usually 600 to 800 students who only have 200 slots. So 1 out of 3, 1 of the 4 students are picked. Out of every 4 students apply, 1 of them gets picked. That's the ratio. Many departments in Warsaw University, anyone who shows up gets in because the enrollment numbers are large. But law school, no, law school is even tougher. There's like 5 applicants for every 1 slot. Okay, so this is a competitive, and that means what? You're going to be. It's a sect. It is taking in other words, when you have those kind of selection reduction criteria, what you're doing is selecting for merit. And how they select for merit, the Matura, which is based on your ability of this. and often, how do you do well in the Matura is that you attend the elite lyceums. Students who attend the more elite lyceums tend to do better on the Matura than those who don't attend them. Go to the regionals. Who gets into the elite Matura? The lyceums are the children of the ruling class. So therefore, in many ways, the purpose of university education is not about, if you were interested in educating you for technical voices and technical knowledge, okay, go to the agricultural university or go to the Polytechnic. They're far better. If you want a job after university that's going to pay you better, it would have been far smarter for you to go to the Polytechnic. You'll make much more after graduation than you'll make 3 times to 4 times as much from graduating from there than you graduate from Warsaw University with an American Studies degree. Okay. Why do you do such a degree? We do this such a degree because you have English language. Because with English language, what you can do, you can probably get a management position or really a governmental job at the interagency or intergovernmental agency level. It is elite replacement. I'm skipping ahead to education a little bit, but that's what the purpose of the university, and this is the role of education. Education is designed so that you can replace the leaders. And this is the purpose why you're here. And one of the things that you're going to be, the people who are going to have the skills to do it, are going to enter into political life. Either they may enter into the party political, or they may enter political life by administration. But then this leads us, so statecraft is this idea of what you're engaging in political life. And statecraft has tools. Now, one of the things I want to mention here is the problem of power. I've mentioned this before, but I have to hint it again. Because there's one of the big mistakes we'll misunderstand is there's a tendency, we want to talk about power. What is power? Power is nothing more than the ability to get what you want. And especially to get others to help you, assist you to get what you want. That's what power means. It's the ability to either you yourself get what you want. It can be mentally, it can be physically, it can be emotionally, any means or mechanism you do to get what you want. Or to get others to do that. Again, other means. You can use any mechanism to do it. Physical force, persuasion, bribery, emotional blackmail, guilt tripping. These are the strategies we get even sex, even attraction. In fact, one of the things that people do is that people are attracted to other people. People like people. And therefore, you know that they like you. What do? You use that to get them to do things for you. That's power. That's what charisma means. Charisma in Weber is the attractiveness of a person. And that therefore the smart political actor who knows that people are attracted to them will use that attraction to get them to do things for them. To either help elect them, help support them, use them to mobilize, put pressure on other actors to support him or to do what he wants. This is how we understand power. So hard power is what? Hard power is soft power. First fundamental misunderstanding. Hard power is always the use of carrots, rewards, and inducements. What is an inducement? Hey, money. Some kind of something, a benefit I'm giving you or offering you. Inducement. Pay. Money. Position. Reward. Honor. Status. Or sticks. Punishment. Taking money away from, taking benefits away. Dishonoring you. Threatening you. In other words, sticks. Coercion. Violence. Carrots and sticks. It is now here. hard power is not, it is not only the use of military, but also economic means to influence the behavior of other political bodies or other political actors. But in terms of social entities of interstate relations or intergovernmental relations, bodies, but also retail politics, you can talk about actors, so bodies are actors. This form of political power is often aggressive, coercion, or that's why Weber says the state is the only legitimate actor of violence. The state actor is the only actor that can use violence or coercion in this sense. Yet not every act of coercion is the use of military force or violence. Okay? And we hate to say it, emotional blackmail is a form of coercion. In other words, all you passive-aggressive types out there, you're engaging in violence. You're using coercion to get what you want. In other words, emotional coercion is just as much as coercion as physical coercion. Now, of course, physical coercion is more violent than it, but it's still a form of coercion. In other words, physical coercion is different from emotional coercion. It's still coercion, but there's a difference. They're not identical. That's why there's a difference between words and baseball bats. We have this wonderful saying among our postmodern colleagues that language is violence, words are violence. Well, I'm sorry, saying bad words to you. Which would you rather have? Someone saying bad words to you or being hit with a baseball bat for 10 minutes? What would you prefer? Baseball bat for 10 minutes or some bad words? This is why the child nursery rhyme, sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. There's the irony of children nursery rhymes know more about reality than highfalutin academic theorists who today preach that words are violence. This is the fundamental problem here. So now this is hard power. What is hard power? Hard power is economic, trade. In other words, this is one of the things that's often misunderstood about hard power. People say, economic ability. See, it's China has soft power. And how is China soft power? All their business relationships and trade agreements. No, that's not soft power, that's hard power. Soft power is what? It's people like you. China has no soft power. I mean, very little. If there's any soft power, it's that people would look at China as a role model, not because of their economic ability or their success, but because they might look at, that's not true. They might look at their economic ability and their success as something they would like to emulate, but not because they're actively getting supported by or helped by China. In other words, that's why. It's the attraction. You look at them and say, I just want to be exactly like them. Okay? It's like, this is like fanboys or fangirls who look at their role models on media and they, I want to be like that person. Okay? That's what charisma is. That you're attracted to that person and want to imitate them and be like them. This is how you understand soft power. And that political actors can use this. Soft power is political. This is what Joseph Nye meant by soft power. Political actors have the ability. America, because of the attractiveness of the American ideal and the American vision, had a lot of people looking at America and emulating America. And therefore that gave America a lot of ability to influence other nations, to do what it wanted on the international arena. That is what soft power means. Britain, America, hegemons who tended to have a lot of attractive qualities that other nations look towards. In fact, there's a good rule. Soft power does not usually happen without hard power. There's not a case of a soft power entity. In other words, that has no hard power, is not seen as someone of a respectable level of hard power on the global stage. And actually, if you look at even political actors, charisma without, this is what Machiavelli will talk about, the problem of unarmed prophets. An unarmed prophet is a prophet who doesn't have the means to secure or deliver what the prophecy he's bringing out there. Unarmed prophets always fail. Armed prophets succeed. Therefore, charisma that is not tied to hard power will not be effective. So therefore, this is the fundamental connection of this. And this frames our understanding of the fruit tools. In other words, this discussion of how every one of these tools are going to be instruments of hard power and soft power. In other words, hard power and soft power dimensions are available in all things. Some things like administration law may have more hard power than soft power. But what? They also have the attractiveness of law. The attractiveness of your legal system may be, in other words, go look at different legal systems. There's a big difference. French law, Anglo-Saxon law, where there is the preliminary and the principle of strict rules, relatively strict rule of law, but juries. Italian law, Latin law, which means Latin culture, which means French and Spanish and Portuguese, and Italian, Portuguese, and French. They're Roman law models, but because of the language of each one of their languages, their law is loose and with hyper flexibility in the law. It's too loose, too flexible. No one wants contracts there. Where German law, oh God help you, you're fucked. Because why? German law is the German language is so precise. German language is so technically precise. German language is great for science, horrible for law. Why? Because it's too precise. It doesn't offer any room of negotiations. This is why the English language tends to be the preferred language of legal negotiations. Why? Because of the flexibility of the language. It allows both precision, but also grants levels of complexity and flexibility. So, I'm skipping administration for now for a second. Going to law, we'll go back. So law is what? The administrative tool of what? Both state formation, there's your constitutions, your structures, normal laws, and regime management. In other words, law is both the instrumentation of the rules of the game, the rules you're going to be playing by, the structure of management of state formation, how you're going to form the state, how it's going to be governed, what are the principles, what are the rules, constitutional creation, norms, ultimate norm rules, right? Then what else? Regime management. How it is the laws that deal with the operation of the given regime in its day-to-day operations. The enforcement of norms, the carrying out of rules. The intent of its codes of laws can serve to consolidate the authority not only of states but also particular elements within it. Early modern Europe, the growth of law and legal institutions owe much, contrary to conventional views, to monarchs. And the monarch intent of increasing the strength of his state against the feudal monarchy. This is the fundamental connection of this. In other words, the history of political development of states and law was the attempt of kings and monarchs to wrestle control away from local aristocrats, local nobility. In modern democracies, written constitutions have come to be accepted as fundamental law designed to ensure the preservation of the democratic regime, as it says here, as well as safeguards for individual minority rights, right? These are the classic arguments. Bodies of law grows out of this framework. Constitutional law has importance for the political health, if not the very survival. In other words, the role of constitutional law in democratic societies play the fundamental role of the survival of democratic structures, democratic regimes. So, Tocqueville observed that there are three factors that maintain democratic Republican America: the unique history and configuration of the society, its laws, and its manners, morals, and intellectual outlook in the broadest sense. In arguing that the last of these, that's called political culture. In other words, the mores, the habits, political culture, is actually most critical. For example, look at the contemporary criminology. It increasingly recognized the importance of attacking the symptoms of criminal activity, public disorder, vandalism, petty crime, and it understands that reliable enforcement of existing laws is more important than having good laws on the book that are regularly ignored. In other words, you can have great laws, but you're not enforcing them. I mean, Poland is a joke in this regard. The powerful can ignore the law. My favorite example of this: who's the guy who does every year at the beginning of the year the big concert and celebration to raise money for medical things for hospitals and things like this? Orshak. A perfect example of him. 2.5 years ago, the prosecutors were going after, because what he does is he raises money and then he has his wife and his friends buy the goods. He pays them to buy the goods at inflated prices, so he and his friends get rich. And he gives the hospital material to hospitals that really don't need them because they don't have the staff who can use them a lot of times. So they don't. Does he give the money? Does he raise the money to give it to the hospitals to do things with it? No, to buy medical equipment. And who is the medical equipment being bought by? His wife and her friends. Okay. So the government was kind of going. The PIS government, because he's a big PO supporter. The government was going after. PIS government was prosecutors going after him. The court even said, "Show us the documents. We want to see your documents." And he told the judge, "No, I'm not going to do it." Above the law. Or when Jaruzelski's daughter is still living in the house he and his daughter lives in the house of another person who went to court, has court orders for 3 decades saying that this house belongs to him. And they cannot remove his daughter from the house they're illegally living in. There are people, when you have people who are above the law, you don't have rule of law. And the opposite, if you have people who are below the law, you don't have rule of law either. If you have people who you don't apply the law to because they're not important enough, you don't care about them. So therefore, the rule of law requires that everyone be under it, and that judges shouldn't be arbitrary. Judges should be wholly constrained. That should be arbitrary, powerful, but they should be exercising the sovereignty of the state. So when you disrespect the judge, you're not disrespecting the judge. You're respecting the people or the king. Therefore, in the Anglo-American world versus the Roman world, the German world, the European world, civic judges are just bureaucrats exercising their own administrative authority. Anglo-American judges are what? They're agents of the crown, or agents of the people, the sovereign. So when you disrespect them, you're not disrespecting the judge, you're disrespecting the sovereign. So what can the judge do to you? Throw you in jail. You disrespected me? This was the game that the judge was playing with Trump. He was threatening him. He's going to throw him in jail if he criticized him. But then when he wouldn't do it, they were playing chicken. A common law judge rule would throw, if you showed disrespect, you broke the rule, you just didn't obey my rulings, I made a ruling, you ignored it. You know what happens to you? You get locked in jail. And you don't get trial, no trial. You can ask for another judge to review the case. But you can free yourself. How? By complying with the judge's order. By the way, what happens to your company? If you're a businessman and the judge's order you do and you refuse to carry out the ruling of a judge, a decision of a judge, well, the court takes over your business, appoints a real independent executor to oversee it, and decides whether the company is viable or not. And if you don't show that you are willing to comply with the law and the rules, and they decide that you won't comply with the rules, you refuse to, and you show no, and it's clear to the court that you will not obey the rules. That if I put you back in charge of the company, you'll do the same thing, right? Sometimes what happens is they'll give it back to you, and then a year later you're back in the court with doing the same problem. Okay, so they probably have some experience or knowledge of your behavior. So what does the court will do then? They'll sell your business to the best thing. Whoever buys it at the market value, they'll give you the money to it. Sorry, here's your money. You can't run a business. And by the way, the court will list you and blacklist you for being able to get a new license without trial. Why? Because you had always the capacity to do the right thing, and you constantly didn't do the right thing. You could guarantee, in any contempt of court situation, you could free yourself from the situation. So that's the difference between the legal systems. Legal systems, the type of legal system you have, will vary in the things. Yeah, this is the differences between a common law and civil law model. Classic problem. Let's go shrink it a little bit because it's going to be just a little bit so we can get it. Civil law, common law. Civil law, prescriptive character. Common law, prescriptive, descriptive. Influenced by Roman law models, relies on precedent. Civil law, code-based law. Common law, case-based law. Mono-codified legislation for that. Multi-act legislation for common law. Constitution, civil law is totally defined by the Constitution. The common law, statute, judgments, and treaties affected. What? Crimes and offenses easily typified. Crimes and offenses arduously typified. In other words, public law and private law clearly distinguished. In civil law, it's almost what? Non-entity. There's no clear distinction between private law and public law. This is one of the problems in common law situations. There's no private law. There's no distinction between private law and public law. They're interconnected. That's why we have torts. That's why we have writs and state actions in here. In other words, state acting, but that affects both public entities and also private entities. In other words, what is the nature of civil law? It is a inquisitional proceedings, like an inquisition, where in a common law, adversarial. In other words, judges in civil law, judges and the decision makers will ask questions. In a common law situation, juries don't ask questions. Only thing they'll ask a question towards the judge to clarify a rule. They don't ask the jurors, the accused or the parties questions. Only the lawyers are engaged in adversarial model. Another ones, in civil law, mostly written, submissions and other instruments, where the common law in the courtroom is mostly verbal. abundance of notarized forms, lots of forms. Civil law, it's all about documents. That's why the notary in the Polish system is the first legal instrumentation, the first legal body. You want to notify, you want to have something, a record of a court, legal record, you go to a notary. First part of forms, what seals. If you want to screw somebody, if you want to, in Poland, you want to basically, when you go to civil court proceedings, and to be able to introduce a lot of evidence against your enemy, go make claims to your a notary, have them signed and notarized. Then you can introduce them as evidence. What's so funny? In Polish law, hearsay is evidence. What hearsay is? I heard you saying this. That's admissible evidence in Poland. I heard you say this. I heard you say that. Hearsay is admissible in Polish law. In an Anglo common law, it is not admissible. Hearsay or non-relevant testimony is irrelevant. In civil law models, it's allowed. And judges get to decide what every judge, the law defines how he can act, when he can act, and what punishments he gives in civil law. But he gets to judge what's relevant and not relevant. In common law, the rules and procedures and the previous guidelines from previous cases determine what's in the code of evidence, determines what can be admitted as evidence. The judge determines evidence. The judge will determine what can be heard by the jury. But the jury decides on the evidence. Therefore to make the ruling and judgment. So there's a clear distinction here in that sense. You have this thing of notarizing fill-in forms, independent autonomous filing systems. In other words, the nature of transcripts and the admission of evidence to what is evidence is completely different. Legal forms proceeding from the sections of the Spanish codes, i.e. criminal codes, civil codes, legal forms presents in the British Acts. The Acts will do this. Use of Latinisms, the application of Latinisms. Archaic language in civil law, archaic register. Now there's long lists of terms, paired expressions. This is even funnier. In other words, and linguistic uniformity, whereas linguistic diversity, where, in other words, civil law, you have one term for this, but then you have diversity of solicitor, barrister, solicitors, law solicitors, right? The nature of Anglo-Saxon law really fundamentally changes in its character in that sense. No, I don't want that. I want that. Okay. So let's go back to rule of law. Continue. These are the common law. This is the conception of common law versus civil law models, right? Historic background, precedent, rational dissent, court hierarchy, proceedings. Civil law, legal subjects, therefore different types, natural persons, legal persons, obligations, regulate relationships between individuals and persons. Every person has its own right. Then laws of property that distinct between physical or legal and property rights, right? So therefore there's a wholly different structure in the nature of law, that's common law versus civil law. And last but not least, this is the elementations of differences, common law, private law. In other words, common law, what is it? Continuation of legal system, evolutionary common law, revolutionary civil law. Major source of law, custom and practice, civil law, legislative structures. Reliance on procedure, yes, very strong, no, weak. Therefore, in other words, in European courts, every time a judge, you have similar cases, you don't get the same outcome. In an Anglo-American court, the likelihood that with cases of similar situations, the rulings about what is being done and how evidence will be admitted and what will be the guiding principles by which the jury will decide on will be uniform. So whereas every time the same judge can hear similar cases and make completely arbitrary rulings in common law and civil law, he will not be able. That is not possible in a common law model. He cannot rule evident. He can't make an evidentiary ruling in one case one way and and then go by the wholly different, the same kind of evidence, then not apply the same way. In other words, common law restricts how judges can apply law. Civil law, the judge can do what the hell he wants every different time, whatever time he wants. So he can apply. At 1 minute he wants to apply this way. He applies it this way. He likes you. He doesn't like you. You look pretty. You look ugly. In other words, it is the judge's own momentary reaction to a juror. The person he is having to rule on can lead him or her to apply the ruling of how evidence or claims are going to be understood at that moment. Where civil law, what we call common law models, you have the nature of precedents, and judges are bound by what was decided previously. And if he violates that, you can usually use that for an appeal ruling. Like what's going to happen by when the judge allowing the Stormy Daniels testimony into the hearing that happened in this last court. Well, I'm sorry, that Trump will get an appeal, and the case will be thrown out in the appeal. Why? Because the judge allowed inadmissible evidence. That's not allowed procedurally. A judge cannot do that. If he did it, this will automatically be appealable, and a higher court will throw it out. Okay? Judges who act badly get reviewed by appellate courts. In other words, the European systems are much different. The appellate court has to be, the appeals have to be more technically defined, and more, in other words, the fact that a judge made a ruling of different procedure would not be automatically grounds for appeals. You'd have to find some new evidence, exculpatory evidence, or some clear violation of a code or a rule that the judge failed to comply by. Not that he arbitrarily proceeded. Arbitrary proceeding and enforcement is an automatic grounds for appeals in common law, but not automatic appeals in civil law. That's why I've seen cases in Poland where things that would get automatically dismissed in common law models as breach of contract or breach of thing are allowed and permitted. What else? These other things. Judicial review of executive things. Well, yes and no. See, America, we have judicial review of statutes and things. This is something common law. Civil law has been trying this, but when a civil law model does this, then you have judicial tyranny. The second you allow a civil law model to allow judges to overrule judicial statutory decisions, then the judges ultimately become the true legislators. And given that judges are not democratically accountable, that is the most undemocratic and anti-democratic principle there is. Why it's acceptable in a common law model? Because what they can rule on is what they can appeal, and how they can appeal it is restricted by what? The Constitutional Act itself, which is the people's will. So therefore, they cannot simply declare the Constitution itself unconstitutional. Now, major decision format strategies, all these things are the various structures of how we do this, and you go check it out and download the PDF in that sense. Now I want to go backwards and deal with administration, because why? Because I should have dealt with it first. Administration is the offices. It is any complex structure of ruling are going to have subordinate division of labor and dividing up the functions of governing, including executive functions. The executive function, to be effective, is going to have to break up the execution of the laws in various means. The creation of offices. Bureaucracy is the most common contemporary form of administration. Traditional administration was simply officers or magistrates. You'd have, when political life was simpler and the expectation from the state was less extensive as it is now. In other words, over time, people have accustomed that the state delivered to them more and more services. This is both good and bad. Why? Some ways it gives it provides public services for people that the private system cannot deliver or would not deliver as equitably. Okay? But the danger of that is the more and more you do, the more and more you expect the state to deliver, the state becomes overburdened and cannot be effective. In other words, there's a certain element of power. In other words, the more and more you make something, in other words, power is a weird thing. Power is again, remember, power is being able to get what you want, right? Is power something that has an infinite reach? No, because human beings are mortal. Human beings are limited. There's at a certain level, like anything you want, there's going to be a point of maximum optimality. In other words, at a certain level, the more and more powerful you get, right? At a certain level, the more and more things you do, the more and more things you exercise control over, the least power you have. You actually lose your effective ability to deliver things diminish. In other words, there's a problem. The more, if you're so powerful that you have absolute power, but then what happens? It becomes a burden. You're not able to effectively do it. You end up micromanaging everything. The person when power tends to centralize. If you're going to have absolute power, you want to centralize. You want to hoard it. You want to control it. But the more you hoard it, the less and less effective you are. So what is this? The real powerful person is not the hoarding or not the collection and exercising and hoarding of power, but the opposite, the devolving of power. It is managing the devolving of power to other actors acting on your behalf, not the transfer of power to them, but they're exercising on your behalf your power or the system's power. That was the secret of the success of the English monarchy. The English monarchy, in other words, the French and European monarchies, most of the aristocrats held their titles before their titles came from other sources and not directly the ruling king. The English crown, all power comes from all English titles. Before Norman conquest were eliminated, and all titles of English titles come from the crown as gifts, and therefore, if not properly exercised or carried out per rule, they can be returned. They can be taken away and returned back to the crown. So, in other words, you're only exercising this. It is what they call, even actually land ownership is not. Land ownership in England is only usufruct, the right of use. If you don't have a and you can transfer your right of use to your heirs, but if you have no heirs, what happens to the law in England? Land in England? It goes back to the crown. Everything belongs to the crown. And land, property, titles, and that includes fellowships, titles, and things like this. They can be either life grants. I mean, as long as you live, you have the grant to this property and this rights and the money from that. Or you have it's permanently transferred to your family and perpetually in turn of use. And that is, if you don't have a children or an heir to give it to, then it returns back to the state. And then and also the other rule: if you commit treason or breach of promise, that you don't deliver the services that you promised the king, the dukes and barons and these guys are given titles because they're delivering service to the crown. Some things are gifts, some things are given in service. So earldoms and duchies are always service related. There might be family ties and given by family ties, but you are required to deliver service. If you fail to deliver service, they'll strip the title and hand it to somebody else. If there's no heirs or succession, they will transfer it to someone else. Okay? That's how this works. The early concept of administration was feudal and patrimonial. Modern administration is bureaucratic, administrative. Now, Weber basically says modern officialdom functions are following specific manners. This is right from his chapter on characteristics of bureaucracy. He says that there is fixed principles of fixed and official judicial areas, which are generally ordered by rules, that is, laws or administrative regulations. So that in modern situations, the nature of bureaucracy becomes regulated by law and regulations. When you have jurisdiction, in other words, a fixed set of a principle of fixed and official jurisdictional areas. So you have different agencies, different structures, you have different jurisdictions. They have the rules written for them are specific to what they do and carry out. These are regulations, and that they shape the character of things. And he says there's three concepts here. What? The regular activities are required for the purposes of the bureaucratically governed structure, are distributed in fixed ways as fixed duties. So, in other words, a ministry of defense has certain obligations. They have certain jurisdictional concerns. They'll concern what the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and some other security entities with national defense. The Ministry of Interior controls the police force, the State Security Service, and other aspects of internal, actually even deal with immigration and border control and things like that, right? That these different ministries have, then the Ministry of Economy has functions about economic functions of trade and things. The Ministry of Trade will have trade relationships. The Ministry of Labor will have deals with labor management, rules of employment, oversees the structures of regulatory of businesses. Now you see what I mean? Each ministry will have a jurisdictional oversight of a certain field of activity that the state regulates, oversees in the given society. Either economic, social, political, police, legal, jurisdictional. Yes, you have the courts, but you also have the Ministry of Justice, who does what? Help the courts. In other words, the courts are independent in terms of the judges, but all the staff and all the offices and all that things, that is operated under the Ministry of Justice. The Ministry of Justice also deals with prosecution. The prosecutor's offices. They oversee the prosecutor's office and other functions of state justice. So therefore, they're governed and fixed with their duties. They have jurisdictions and specific duties. Second, the authority to give command requires the discharge of these duties is distributed in a stable way and is strictly delimited by rules concerning the coercive means, physical. This means sacerdotal is a very old-fashioned word. I'm quoting Weber here. It usually means like tied to the social and dimension of things and otherwise, right? Which may be placed at the disposal of official. In other words, there's different types of authority. A bureaucratic agent has different responsibilities, and whatever means he is required is limited by how his offices are legislated. The law created by the legislature defines his function, defines his power, defines what he can do. The regulatory agency, the regulation, says how he's going to implement this and the implementation. And also, maybe even the law might just give certain functions. Then the regulation may define the actual power. And this is because in civil law models, there is a problem in civil law models. You have the right, in other words, in common law models, regulations are merely, in other words, there's a difference between a statute, which is law, and a decree from an official, right? They are not equal in law. But in modern civil law, statutes and decrees are equal. So in Poland, a decree of a minister has the same effect as an act of the same. So therefore, this messes this reality, the modern nature and civil law models, creates a problem because there is the duality of in other words, there's not a hierarchy between a statute and a decree. So a ministerial decree has the same effect, can have the same status as a statute of law. And that creates a big problem because why? Therefore, ministers themselves can create norms and regulations and empower that a legislature did not actually statute. And therefore, in other words, the minister's act is not relying on a law for its justification. So the parliament, the elected parliament, has no real role in the implementation or review of that legislation or that regulation, that decree. So this is why there's a lot of talk in American society and Democratic common law side. What's happening is globalization leads to common law models and Roman law models, civil law models of administration arising in American common law models. It happened in England first with the EEC and the bringing of EEC norms into the the English contexts. So England became in other words, the civil service that was already powerful became infinitely powerful because of the EEC and the Europeanization of English law that the EEC brought in with it. The European norms, the European institutions, the European treaties brought in with it. In America, what happened was the rise of administrative structures, that they became more and more power. And Congress simply, one thing is Congress decided they just didn't care, so they let the administration do what it wanted, as long as the administration was captured by legislative interests. As long as the administrative bodies were doing what the Congress wanted, they didn't care. The second that they diverged from congressional interests, the Congress corrected them, okay? So that there's this weird capture of the administration by the congressional committees in America that doesn't exist in common law models, okay? Second of all is that because of administrative law and the willingness of the Congress and the willingness of the Supreme Court to not contradict administrative bodies, hence why we have the question of the major decision coming up on the Exxon case, the Exxon ruling, which basically deferred. The court just said, sorry, we're going to defer to the administrative bodies. We're not going to rule. Whatever the administrative body says is the answer. We won't judge. We won't rule. Which is a scary thing because that means that the Article 3 courts, the constitutionally established courts, are deferring to administrative bodies that have no accountability. So therefore, this is some of the problems of the nature of bureaucracies. And in other words, in the third provision, methodological provisions are made for the regular and continued fulfillments of these duties and their execution. Weber has what we call that's the first principle, all right, which has 3 dimensions. He then continues from the bureaucracy to these 6 other principles. Principles of office hierarchy and levelly graded officials, in other words, hierarchy of officialdom. In other words, bureaucracy is organized in a top-down hierarchy, rigorously divided. It's based on the Prussian model. In other words, it's a military model. In many ways, it's outdated because modern businesses originally followed it, but modern businesses no longer accept hierarchical models. They prefer flexible task-based models. But the nature of in other words, most states are stuck with an 18th century, 19th century administrative model that is now considered completely obsolete. In other words, no sane business today would impose the hierarchical business structure model that used to dominate 1920s, 1930s, 1940s American corporations. But that is merely what the national government does. No flexibility. You create what? A permanent interest of a class, of a group that has interest in that agency alone. It's easily capturable. In other words, this bureaucratic entity and group, because it's so narrowly defined in its interest, is easily captured by that interest. In other words, a regulatory agency regulating a specific thing is going to be easily captured by that interest. And then, in other words, who are you going to go after you leave? After you serve 10 years or 20 years in the agency? What are you going to do? The industry is going to hire you for lots of money. And by the way, who's going to be selected to be the minister regulating those industries? Someone from those industries, usually. So those industries will lobby the legislatures. So what happens? You get hired, people who are managers of the industry lobby the industry parliament, and then they elect what? The people who will become the ministers, who then usually are people who are usually tied to the interests. And then they recruit the future leaders, and in other words, they in this lower staff, they reward and promote the subordinate people who they agree with their political agendas, promote them, and then when it's time to leave, they've served their 20 years, they can get their requirement, they can go in the private sector and get a job in the industry lobbying. So this is in other words, the regulation creates lobbying structures. In other words, the more you regulate, the more likely, instead of having, and because it is so, in other words, the regulatory body being so narrowly constructed, in other words, why the hell do you need secretaries for that department? You have like secretaries. Why don't you just have a pool of secretaries for the whole government, and then when this department needs someone to do effective job typing or something, you come over here now and I do my typing service. This is how modern business does it. Why doesn't government bureaucracy have bloated people who is a typist going to always be typing every hour of her job time during the day? No. Oh, but she can do the other functions. What does those functions usually do? Filing? Well, wait a minute. Why do you need that many people filing stuff? In other words, you end up creating more busy work to justify your labor force. You end up creating more and more useless busy work to legitimize it and expand your bureaucracy. And the nature of bureaucracy is that it doesn't ever shrink. It only grows. Is it ever in your interest to solve a problem? If you're a government bureaucrat assigned to deal with social issues, do you want more social problems or less social problems? More. Why? Less means less money. You have to fire your staff. Maybe you lose your job. More social problems mean what? More staff, more money. Maybe I'll get a promotion. Maybe I'll be a boss of 40 people now rather than only 2 people. If I'm a boss of 20, 30 people, I get to have bigger salaries, bigger office. In other words, the nature of bureaucracy, and particularly in social and problems, any kind of a bureaucrat has no incentive to solve a problem. Hence, why we have more poverty, not less poverty. Why we have more social problems than less social problems. Parkinson's law of behavior. You know the rule about Parkinson's law of behavior? Promote people to their highest level. In a complex organization, people are promoted to their highest level of incompetence. Or the expression goes, diamonds sink and shit floats. You promote people to their level of incompetence. So a very good, effective worker is always going to be in the low in the totem pole. Why? Because they're always doing all the real work. Are they going to be promoted? Because no, they threaten the other managers. The nature of bureaucracy is designed to always perpetuate the problem and perpetuate their status. Now Weber said, this is the opposite of Weber. Weber thought there'd be rational actors. Weber thought that bureaucracy was going to be a rational actor, effective, legalistic, rational actors that were going to be based on scientific principles. The problem is that as human beings are not only rational animals, they're also status-seeking animals. And they have it. And once you establish them, once they're there, they have an interest. And any group that has an interest preserves its own interest at the expense of the interest of the other thing that they're supposed to be supervising. So my choice is to make the world, to improve the ecology, or to keep my job and to get higher status in my job. Most actors is going to think, yes, I want to help the ecology, but I also want to keep my job. I want to keep my job, and that means helping the economy, so I need to justify more money for my department. How do I judge more money? Oh, there's more and more problems in the ecology. You create and discover more problems because this forces more public spending, which then increases the size of the agencies, which then increases your budget and your salaries and your status. Okay? That is the nature of any kind of human organization will do this. So therefore, there's the problem here. This is the Weber's 6 points, the nature of it. We went there and then we did law. We did law already. We went backwards a little bit. Now let's go to the education and culture, because this is the fun one, right? You say, we talked about education a little bit, about schools. What is the purpose of education? Education is a quality. Public education has immediate and visible effect on people's lives. In our egalitarian, diverse society, it is held to be a key element of cultural assimilation and social mobility. So in an egalitarian society, that in basically a heterogeneous society, egalitarian society, you need what? Social mobility and also inclusion, right? Cultural assimilation for inclusion. Inclusion, which means therefore, what are the elements of inclusion? Cultural assimilation and social mobility. So what is public? Now this is state versus civic society based education. You have no private education in Poland. Private education is a joke in Poland. It's basically a money laundering scheme of private universities who have no real accountability to the state system, who are issuing state diplomas. Now, the law changed, no longer state diplomas. Now, every school owns its own diploma. But now, even before the regulatory agency was regulating that exercising that every school had the right diploma. That's gone now. And what is now being done is the agency is regulating the quality of academic performance for the European standards. Public education in the critical system, public simply meant it's available to the public. Public schools in England are private. But they're state schools. You only have state education, including your two Catholic universities. Lublin, John Paul II University of Lublin, right? And Kazimierz. Are these really Catholic institutions? No, they're funded by the state, taxpayer. Notre Dame, I can name hundreds of American Catholic universities. Are they funded by either state or national government? Nope. They're funded by the church fellows, alumni, and things like this. Harvard, Yale, the elite universities, the superstar, are these state institutions? Nope, they're private. They were private families and groups of people gave money. Harvard has more money in its endowment than most countries have. Hundreds of billions of dollars. In fact, Harvard doesn't need to take tuition. They could for 150, they could give the 30,000 students and the staff they had, they could not take any tuition and still pay their faculty for 150 years before they run out of money. This is true with places like Yale, Princeton, and other places. Most private schools in America have hundreds of millions of even the worst case school of the Oberlin College that was sued because of the baker, who had to pay $30 million bakeries. They had $250 million endowment in their school. So what does this tell us about these structures? It tells us that the education purpose is of civic education. What do you need to be an effective citizen? Leadership education, that means your elite replacement. You're replacing the elite rulers, and who's going to be the rulers in the society? Next one is employment and training skills. This is what? This is that every education, you have the skills necessary and knowledgeable to survive in the economy. The fourth function should be highlighted: self-improvement and what? And entertainment. I'm sorry. The more democratic the society is, see, traditional society is elite, civic education. It was really elite replacement was the old model. Civic education and specialized knowledge were for lawyers. The real first universities of the Middle Ages that trained priests and lawyers, right? Who would be what? Elite advisors to kings and princes, right? So it's specialization of knowledge and education. Republican, as you become more and more democratic, the need for civic education emerges. In fact, the reason why we have public education, that all citizens had to do it, was primarily political education. So everyone would know how to be a good citizen. This is the joke. Modern democracies don't want you to be good citizens. They don't teach you. In other words, you should know everything about your political system. Most of you don't.
That's true.
So therefore, public education was designed to keep you ignorant and stupid. That you be, in other words, again, this is a product of communist and socialist education, keeping you stupid and ignorant of your political system, not being able to manipulate it. This is a sad thing. In other words, it's not a bug, it's a feature. Okay? Now, the nature of democratic education is what? Self-improvement or entertainment. Think of, come on, also is a perfect example of this, isn't it? Look at the subjects we do. Research. This is the problem of modern democratic. The modern democratic university wants you to be entertained. They need you to be entertained for 4 years to delay your entry in the job market, so that when you enter the job market, you're going to be 4 years there and some experience more than high school, so that you'll be more likely to get a job, be employed, than be unemployed immediately. Okay? It's a cynical attempt of manipulating unemployment. They want 50% of the society going into higher education to delay unemployment. And therefore they need to entertain you for 4 years, knowing that you won't be educated for this. So another aspect of education is what? Elite institutions like Oxford, Big Ten, Ivy Leagues, the elite military schools like the St. Clara or the old German Kriegsacademy, or Sandhurst, or West Point, or Annapolis, right? The elite institutions, state institutions. And de Gaulle, in his creation of the Fifth Republic, created the École Nationale d'Administration, which up until the 21st century, before the 20th century, to become president or important in French politics, before the rise of Sarkozy, and before Sarkozy, what was his name? Not Hollande, but Jacques Chirac. Jacques Chirac was not a graduate of the École Academy. Sarkozy wasn't. In other words, they didn't graduate. In other words, the modern French system doesn't like the Gaulle system. But up until the 20th century, from the 1960s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, you had to be a graduate of the École to be any way in French politics and French leadership. This was the elite. This was training your elite. Education culture simply we'll stop here. I'll probably highlight on culture in the break, so we'll take our break. So I'll stop. We're at time for the break, and therefore I will stop here, and we'll see you in 50 minutes. Bye-bye.